when my wife collapsed and the ambulance raced to our ranch, I never imagined a neighborhood gate and a petty HOA president would be the reason she almost died. But when they blocked the only road to my 150-year-old family home, they didn't just delay emergency care, they triggered a legal war that would destroy everything they'd built. And I had the power to end it, because I owned the land they stood on. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday morning at the 150th ranch my family had owned since before the county was even formed. A piece of land passed down through 6 generations, nestled deep in the rolling hills of our rural community, a place where the breeze smelled like oak and sage. The wooden beams of the original barn still stood tall, and the fence line stretched 4 acres untouched by time. But that morning, the ordinary became life or death in an instant, when my wife, Hannah, suddenly collapsed in the kitchen with a seizure that left her unresponsive and twitching violently on the floor. Eyes rolled back and foaming at the mouth as I scrambled to call 911 with shaking hands. Within minutes, the dispatcher confirmed an ambulance was en route from the town hospital. But the real problem wasn't the medics, it was the narrow gravel road that led from the public highway to our ranch gate, a private access route that crossed through a small sliver of land annexed years ago by the neighboring HOA development. A petty group of transplant city folk, who built a cluster of modern homes at the edge of what used to be open cattle land and decided they had a right to police everything that moved near their subdivision, even though our ranch had been there before any of them were born, let alone their vinyl-fenced houses. I'd had issues with them before Karen, their HOA president, had demanded I cut down the 100-year-old pecan trees lining the road because the falling leaves created debris, and once tried to fine me $200 for noise pollution when I fired a few rounds at my own shooting range. But I never imagined their arrogance would go this far. As I carried Hannah into the truck bed, prepared to meet the ambulance halfway, I got the call from the paramedics. They were being detained at the front gate by HOA security, who claimed non-resident emergency vehicles require written entry clearance, and I thought surely this had to be a misunderstanding. But when I drove full speed to the gate and skidded to a halt in the gravel, I saw them, 3 rent-a-cop-looking men in yellow, reflective vests, standing smugly in front of the locked gate while the ambulance sat there, red lights spinning but sirens off, paramedics shouting and gesturing, trying to get through, and behind them was Karen herself, arms folded like she was some kind of war general, barking orders like this was a battlefield and not a woman's life at stake. I jumped out of my truck, yelling, "Open the damn gate. She's not breathing." But Karen held up a clipboard and said, "This route crosses private HOA property. You know the rules. No access without 48-hour notice or board approval." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife was dying, and this woman was quoting bylaws like it was a game. I ran past the guards, toward the gate control box, but one of them tried to block me until one of the paramedics shouted, "Sir, we'll lose her if we don't get moving now." And with pure rage boiling through my blood, I shoved the guard aside, climbed the gate panel, and yanked the manual override switch hidden under the maintenance flap, a trick I'd learned back when the county used to control the utility line maintenance, forcing the gate to creak open just enough for the ambulance to push through. Within seconds, they loaded Hannah onto the stretcher, gave her an emergency injection of anti-seizure meds, and raced down the gravel road toward the main highway while I stood there panting, fists clenched, as Karen screamed, "That's destruction of HOA property. You'll be fined." Like that meant anything compared to watching my wife nearly die because of her obsession with control. I followed the ambulance to the hospital, heart pounding, hands numb on the steering wheel. And after what felt like hours, the ER doctor finally came out and said she'd pulled through, but barely. And if the paramedics had been delayed by even another few minutes, her brain would have started shutting down. That was the moment something inside me broke, not just the fear, but the patience, the tolerance, the willingness to let these HOA tyrants keep bullying me and everyone else in this town with their fake authority and power trips. I didn't say anything right away, not to the cops who took a report at the scene, not to Karen when she emailed me a $1,000 fine for unauthorized emergency access, and not even to the local paper when they heard whispers of the incident and asked for comment. I stayed silent, because I knew I was about to launch something bigger than anyone expected. What Karen and her HOA didn't know was that my grandfather had been a founding board member of the original township before it was incorporated into a county district, and the parcel their HOA sat on, it was technically granted under a land agreement that I held the residual interest in, an old forgotten clause buried in the historic land titles, stating that if the HOA ever obstructed public safety or violated county emergency policy, the original grantor, my family, could petition to reclaim administrative control through a process known as protective dissolution. A legal mechanism almost no one used because it required decades-old paperwork and precedent, had all of it stored in waterproof boxes in my late father's office. Documents that showed we still held voting rights over that easement road and its usage. And I spent the next 3 days gathering every scrap of evidence. The paramedics, written statements, the hospital timeline, Even the 911 dispatcher's audio confirming the delay caused by the HOA. I met with a lawyer friend, a land use specialist named Carla, who nearly dropped her coffee when she saw the clause and said, "You realize what this means, right? You can dissolve their governing power over that entire subdivision." And that's when the real work began. We filed a petition with the county board, citing violation of emergency access regulations, obstruction of medical response, and abuse of private authority over public right-of-way. And while we prepared our case, I quietly met with other residents near the HOA, some of whom had horror stories of their own fines for flags, citations for lawn, height, surveillance, cameras pointed at their bedrooms. One man even got penalized for letting his disabled daughter use a wheelchair ramp without architectural approval, and I asked them, "If you had a chance to take them down, would you back me?" And every single one of them said yes. I filed the injunction paperwork the same day Hannah was discharged, her voice still hoarse but her grip tight around my hand as I told her, "They'll never hurt another family again." And as word spread, the HOA board started to panic, emailed threats, tried to counterclaim my documents were fraudulent. But the county land registrar verified them as authentic and older than anything in the HOA charter. The countdown had begun, and by the time the emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, I had 30 witnesses, a signed letter from the paramedics supervisor, and drone footage showing the blocked ambulance at the gate hall, of it leading to the final moment when I would stand in front of the county commission and ask them to do what hadn't been done in over a century: dissolve the homeowners association for obstructing life-saving emergency access. And from the look on Karen's face when she realized I wasn't bluffing, I knew she was finally afraid, not of me, but of losing the fake empire she'd spent years building atop land she never really owned.